This is the Storyworks Roundtable, where we have conversations about craft, because becoming a successful author begins with writing a great story. Hello and welcome to this week's Storyworks Roundtable. Today, Robert, Kathryn, and I are talking about single character scenes or even single character short stories. How do you keep tension on the page and keep your plot advancing when you've only got one actor on that stage? It's a good question. All right, what's the answer?
One giant, boring internal monologue.
Oh.
Sort out with themselves.
Never. No, it is an interesting dilemma because sometimes we do want to have that single character scene or even short story. Episode 2 of the Storyworks reading series, Black Bart, has basically a single character on the page for most of the story. And one of the things Susan did is she uses the protagonist's memories. They aren't full scene flashbacks for the most part, but moving into his memories and using that sense of close third interiority allows us to get a sense of interacting with other people, even though it's not actually happening on the stage. Is that something you two have tried?
I see.
I have.
I've written many single character scenes. Yeah, go on, Kathryn. You've tried that?
Yeah, I actually have a short story that is just a single character, and he's alone and isolated for most of it. And so I used flashbacks. I did actually full kind of flashback scenes, but I also have done just with him, interacting with his environment. So then I think you have to make other things more important, like they fill the role of characters, like whether that's your setting or the theme or what he's struggling with internally needs to be much more visible on the page than maybe you would have it if it was a single or a character interacting with another character, right? Because then you get a little more of the interpersonal going on, whereas you have to really focus on what's going on internally or what they're interacting with.
Right
on the page.
Yeah, and Susan definitely did that in Black Bart. There are some crows right at the beginning and they come back at the end, right. And you get a much greater sense of time passing with the weather and with the movement of the sun. And so it's not only time passing in the character's thoughts, but also over the course of the day while he's out of doors.
Well, and he interacts with his environment too, in a way that kind of gives you that setting as character a little bit more too, because he's this old man on his farm that nobody is going to take over after he's done. So he's falling apart. It's falling apart. The world has kind of got this very almost morbid feel to it, right? So you get that from the environment, so you don't have to get that from another person telling it to him, right? Him interacting with his environment in the way that he loves it and cares for it and has cared for it versus how it is now and what he can and can't do. It's a good practice in terms of that, being able to get your character and your setting to interact really impactfully.
Right, it is. And it's interesting you use the word morbid. I never felt it was morbid myself, so I kind of love that you did, because mood, we all are affected differently and we all interpret things differently as readers experiencing a story. So it's great to have more than one perspective on it. It definitely has a kind of sadness to it because it is the end of an era, the old man, the farm no one will take over, the old bull, Black Bart. Yeah, and I think when we do more with our setting as character and we do more with that character's interaction to keep the emotion, to keep the reader's empathy engaged, we do have to do more with mood, right? So that it doesn't turn into something too on the nose or something saccharine.
Right. You don't want your character to sit there and have an internal monologue that makes the reader go, yeah, I knew that. Yeah, I knew that. Why am I reading this? Skip, right?
So it seems as if then what we need to think about is how everything gets externalized to some degree to reflect back metaphorically. Because without other characters to prompt that, you have to make something trigger it. And it reminded me again of, and I've mentioned it before, but Castaway is a good example of an entire movie with just one character, I guess, for most of it. To the degree where we even get incredibly attached to a basketball. So so they've managed to put all that emotion in there. I remember, I think it was quite recently actually, there was a Stephen Pressfield article about introspective moments as big turning points, and he was using some brilliant actor moments where it's just a look to the camera or a quirk of the eye or something small that lets the viewer in that particular case know that something has changed within them, and that's very clever. I mean, obviously you can do that with you pointing a camera at them, but it's the same technique really when you're writing. Is you understand what are you pointing the camera at, and how does that trigger that introspective moment without writing it out as an internal monologue that's just telling and not showing.
Right. Well, and you mentioned metaphor, Robert, and that is so important in these scenes because you are trying to create that interplay between the internal and the external world. And so like the crows in the Black Bart story become the eyes watching the protagonist. He interprets the way they look at him as jeering him, as mocking him, right? And you wouldn't get that without the crows there to interact with. And so in order to not resort to the monologue, you need to find those elements within your world, whatever that is, that can play those roles in the story. So metaphor and subtext become hugely important.
And if you think about it, it's not really all that difficult because we might be people might be listening to this and thinking, oh, God, how am I going to do that? Find something metaphorical. But how many of us have, thumped the computer or, thrown something across the room or, inanimate objects that become the focus of our emotion. We, humans tend to do it anyway. So it's probably one of the easiest things to do is to take you back to your everyday surroundings. I think, when has something triggered an emotion for me, or converse, you're sorting through something in the, in a room and pick out an old photo that reminds you of something, or maybe someone who's passed, or all of a sudden there's a flood of emotion. It's just an inanimate object.
Right. Well, and going back to the Castaway example, you need to show that everybody needs human connection and he's isolated, therefore he's going to be lonely. So of all the objects that wash up on that beach with him, what can he make into a companion? It's not going to be the ice skate, right? It's the volleyball, which has the brand name Wilson. So it comes pre-named, and then when he's got that bloody hand and the handprint ends up on the white volleyball, there's kind of a face put on it. So without stretching plausibility so much that readers go, okay, now you're just like, you're pulling my chain, get over it. We get this evolution of Wilson and Wilson's importance to the character as his isolation is prolonged and his loneliness grows without Tom Hanks ever sitting on the beach going, boy, I'm lonely.
If only I had a convenient volleyball to pretend that was a face.
Yes. Whoever can I talk to?
Right, exactly. And I mean, this might be kind of obvious, but giving your character something to do as well. Like, I mean, there's action scenes where your character's the only one on the page, but if you're in a more quiet scene, like giving them something to do with their hands or their body or interact with, I think helps a lot, no matter, like I said, whether you're seeing the point of the scene is action or the point of the scene is more reflection, like giving them something physical to do makes a big difference.
One of the writing exercises I assign students is to have their character sitting down at a desk to write a letter. And they might not actually write a letter, but you limit what the character is doing so much that then the writer is forced to find a way to create tension and emotional pull without it being action driven. So even if that, never goes anywhere and never makes it into a story, it's a great exercise to play with, interiority, exteriority, physicality, stillness. Who is this character? What does the character want? What am I conveying to the reader? And then if you can pinpoint those elements, then when you do give the character action and movement, you can make sure it's essential. Make sure that you aren't relying on movement and action to carry the scene, right? Because if we have a single character, what is the purpose here? It's the thing we can empathize with. It's the thing that pulls the reader into that person.
Well, that's right. You've still got the basic story elements in there. Then there needs to be some goal and some conflict, and presumably something that's holding them back. Which is difficult, really, isn't it? When if that's internal, that they're not actually physically trying to escape a cage or something like that, and it's just one of those single character scenes. It's actually something that's got some angst or something emotional about it anyway. So I think that you don't have any choice but to start to project.
Right. And Black Bart does that really well. Because you've got an old man going out to check on a bull, and he falls down in the corral, and he breaks his hip, and he can't get back up. That's the plot, right? And yet, it's this fantastic story full of emotional pull. So, Kathryn, why did the story work for you? I talked to Susan about it. I've already told everyone why I like the story. I'm gonna...
That's funny.
Yeah.
Let's see. I think a lot of it comes down to mood and empathy. Like, I could empathize with that character. He reminded me very much of my own grandparents. And his attitude and some of the trials that he was going through were so real and so human that you just immediately feel for him. And I think it was interesting, tension wise and stakes wise, what was at stake kind of evolved through it. You kind of were is that really what he's talking about? And then as he gets closer and closer to the climax, you're like, oh, no, he's serious. And when his son shows up and then leaves, you're like, don't leave, you kind of root for him and don't root for him, anyway. So there was a lot of really good empathy for me with the main character. And I think that was what kept me really involved.
Yeah.
It was so heavy. It was good. Anyway, I don't know if I'm going to, I want people to go listen to it if you haven't listened to it, because it's really, really good.
So, do we need to say spoiler alert?
I know, right? Spoiler alert. But yeah.
So
definitely that empathy for the character.
If you're listening to this podcast, you are probably a writer, and you've maybe heard me talk about the Storyworks reading series. It is the new branch in the Storyworks family tree. It is a literary journal podcast. That's right, a hybrid, a literary journal for your ears, with a print anthology at the end of the year of the best of the podcast. I am open for submissions, and I want to see your best prose right now. I am taking both fiction and creative non-fiction. You can read the guidelines and submit your work at storyworkspodcast.com/submit. What are you waiting for? It's time to see your stories published and sit on the other side of this microphone from me. Have a conversation about your storycraft.
So does it place more emphasis then on that vicarious position shifting where we need to really be able to see through that character's eyes? Does it mean that you need to be even closer in the narrative?
Maybe because you don't have the interplay of other characters and action in order to move the story, right? There's nothing to shift your focus away from the single character, away from this one thread, this one narrative, this one emotional experience. You know, there's no, I mean, the word that comes to mind is diluting, but I don't want it to have a negative connotation to it. But, you know, because there's nothing else, no one else on the page, you become very focused. When you were talking, Kathryn, what came to mind is theme, you know, because you've got this movement, whether it's a short story or a scene, with a single character, the plot becomes very streamlined, right? You fall down, or you write a letter, or you know, whatever, bake some bread. But then there's still something the scene is about that's crucial. Right.
Yeah,
so
it's the bigger picture thing. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So in Blackbird, it's him falling down, but it's love, it's relationships, it's history, it's the end of an era. It's all of those things that we keep thinking about, that keep resonating with us as we read and after we've read it, you know, that aren't about him laying in the dirt in a corral.
Right. I recently watched the Masterpiece Theater version of All Creatures Great and Small. I don't know if you guys, the most recent one that just came out. And it kind of reminded me of that in a way, like these little small stories where really the story is about, you know, like a dog gets sick, or, you know, is the cow doing what, you know, it's like, you know, all these little tiny things, but it's greater than that because that's the main plot. But the theme is the relationships and the developing, you know, all of these little things. So it's kind of like that with Blackbird too, is very small plot stories, but big major character and relationship and thematic things going on. So
yes. Yeah. Yeah. What else do we need to carry a single character scene?
I kind of want to dig deeper into that point of view thing, because you talked about being close in, and I know we were kind of like, you know, third person, first person, like if you want to be really, really close, either way would work, right? But I kind of wonder, like, could we do something like that in more of an omniscient or a distant, you know, narrative and pull it off? And it would be different, right? The feeling would be different.
Yeah,
right.
I was thinking the
more
same.
like watching the character interact rather than feeling what they're feeling and doing what they're doing, right?
Right. I think you could. I think the, you know, pitfall of a distant third narrative is that you would lose some of that emotional connection. You might reduce the empathy the reader feels too much. Now, in omniscient, there's no reason why you couldn't also have a close perspective, but then you would also be going beyond that perspective to be omniscient. So you might show what the old man remembers and how he feels about his wife. And then the omniscient narrator could also show you something or tell you, you know, maybe you don't enter the character's point of view, but you can tell us something about his wife's experience. So you could do more than a close third parameter sets up.
I think it would be more challenging for me not to just go grab another character in an omniscient, though, because you could just go like, let's just go over here for a second, or let's just go over there for a second, you know.
Right.
Like in the Black Bard example, like, let's just go find out what his son's doing, or let's just, you know, that sort of a thing.
Yeah.
Whereas the close third kind of takes that option away, right?
You're right. Like in Black Bard, if you were in the omniscient, you might show the son getting the feed for the bull and driving toward the farm. And so then you're creating the element of a ticking clock, like, will the son get there in time? But that isn't the point of the story.
Right.
You know,
exactly.
the point is not that time is running out, because he is his own agent. He makes his own choice at the end. You know, And even if you just expand the frame of the story, you might be tempted to do things like go into full flashback, and then you're leaving some of that interiority that makes the story so singular and so special, you know? Right. And then you are ultimately putting other characters on the stage. It's just in a different time frame.
I like the idea, though.
Choices.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. From what you were saying earlier on, Alida, about, with the writing exercise, it's often we think of creativity as something that's this sort of vast, rambling, needs to be unrestrained. But in actual fact, restrictions tend to boost creativity because you have to write your way around it in this particular case. So the sitting at the desk to write a letter and you can't do anything else forces the writing mind to go somewhere with that. So I think it's instructional, that's for sure.
It is. So maybe everybody listening should go write a single character scene or a short story and give yourself a limited setting and, a limited point of view, whether it's first person or third person, and see what happens, because you might surprise yourself. You might come up with a real gem that never would have occurred to you otherwise, because we're so ready to go to our favorite tools and to start sort of seeing the story play out in our mind's eye a certain way. But those moments of stillness can be the thing that really bring us a character home to a reader. Like that might be the intimacy that's needed for real bonding and connection between the reader and that character, having the stillness, having the interiority, having that nothing else to pay attention to feeling.
Definitely.
And then test yourself and see if you can turn it into a major turning point.
Yeah.
One
See if it has a home.
An entire story. Yeah.
Are you ready to take your storycraft to the next level? StoryWorks Fiction Online School has courses available right now, from micro courses on character traits to master level workshops on plot and building characters. There are also live workshops with your instructor in the classroom with you every week, guiding your progress and workshopping your manuscripts along the way. All students enrolled in StoryWorks Fiction, whether active in a class or not, can take advantage of the monthly free live Q&A calls with Alida. Check out StoryWorksFiction.com today and take your storycraft to the next level. Thank you for listening to the StoryWorks Roundtable. Find all our shows, show notes, and videos at StoryWorksPodcast.com.